So we've got our leather punched and ready to go. It's locked here in our stitching pony, so it's not going to go anywhere. And I've got both my needles threaded up with some nice white thread. And just to start off the saddle stitch, we're going to go in through the first hole. And then we're going to line our needles up and pull our thread so it's even in length on both sides. We don't have one side that's longer than the other, because that can cause problems later down our stitch line. And now we're simply going to go in the next hole down the line, pull it through. Don't pull it super tight because you can pull thread through and throw off the length of your thread. I'm going to lay that over top of the thread sticking through the other side, and now I'm just going to push the other needle back through. This is our second needle, and now I've got a completed stitch that I can go ahead and pull snug. You don't have to crank down on it because you can risk tearing out your leather and ruining your stitch. And that is the process that we're going to repeat all the way down. We're going to, starting on the same side every time. So the first needle I'm going to do is from this side, push it through. I'm going to lay it over top of the thread sticking out the other side, and I'll show the other side of the stitch line to show you that part of the process. And then I take my second needle, push it back through the same hole, snug it up a little bit, rinse, and repeat. And before too long, you can find yourself falling into a great rhythm where you're moving right along and it's not taking you a whole lot of time at all to put a nice stitch line together. So let's move the camera over to the other side and let's show you what the other side looks like so you understand what I mean when I say I'm laying this thread over top of this thread. Alright, so this is the other side of our piece that we're working on. So I'm going to continue pushing through from the other side now as step one. And now I've got two lengths of thread coming out the same side of my leather. I'm going to take the thread that I just pulled through, lay it over top of my second thread that was already there. I'm going to do this with every single stitch consistently so my stitch line lays out uniformly and in the same way. So if I take this stitch, and this is determined by whichever way you do it with your first stitch. If your first stitch is laid over top, then every single stitch should be laid over top, laid over top, laid over top to keep a consistent stitch line. If you're going, if you do a few stitches that are all laid over top and then you do a couple that are underneath and your other thread is the one over top, you'll end up with waves and wobbles in your stitch line just because of how your thread is laying, and it's going to make your stitch line look a little less desirable. So just to see it again, I'm going to bring this guy through. I'm going to lay it over top and bring this underneath like so, and push this second needle back through that same hole, just like that. And you can see we've got some wax crumbs that are building up. That's just kind of a side effect of this particular thread, but you can just brush those right off and they don't affect anything. So there is, I'll do one more, come through, lay it over top, bring this one over underneath, back through the same hole, and pull them snug. And that is how you do the saddle stitch. Two threads pulling against each other, so each individual stitch is pulled against each other and locked in on itself. Makes for a really strong, very nice and uniform stitch line. Alright, so the last part that we'll cover for the saddle stitch is what to do when you're at the end of your stitch line. How do you finish it off? And we're going to do a technique called back stitching. What that means is we're simply going to continue doing a saddle stitch, but we're going to reverse the direction that we do it, and we're going to stitch back over ourselves. So I'm just going to go back over top. Now again, I'm going to stick with the same pattern. So the thread I just put through, thread 1, I'm going to lay over top of thread 2. Thread 2 is going to get pushed back through that same hole, and the stitch is going to get snugged down. And I'm going to do this, my personal preference is 3 or 4 stitches depending on the size of my project and what I'm doing. If it's something like a knife sheath or a holster or something that's going to see a lot of heavy use and wear and tear, I'm going to go for 4 at least back stitches just to make sure that it's on there nice and secure. Now, there's 3 complete back stitches. Now, to finish off our thread, there's a couple different ways we can go about it. I will generally go back over top of that last stitch and push it through, and then you can trim off your thread on the back. This side would be the side of your project that's going to be facing out or is going to be most visible all the time. Then this would technically be the back of your project, so you can trim your thread and then melt the ends and squish them down flat. Or, let's see if I can push that back out without piercing my thread. There we go. A little bit of a pierce, but that's okay. Or what you can do is you can go on up to the next stitch. Depending on if you glued or taped your layers of leather together before you stitched, this is going to be really hard to, impossible to do. But you can come up between the layers like that. So we're going to go into this next hole and we're going to push up. Our needle's going to come out between our layers of leather like this, and then we're just going to tie off a couple of overhand knots. Those knots are going to get sucked down between the layers of leather, and then I can snip the ends. I don't do that method a whole lot myself. I usually just go back onto the back side and melt and press, but you can see there, and I can even give that a little finish off with my lighter. Just to kind of melt those ends. Just be careful you don't singe your leather. And that is how we would finish off. It's a couple different ways we would finish off a saddle stitch line.